room. All right, so we are rolling. I'll start a minute early because I feel, it's probably not even a minute early anymore, because I feel like we can't fit any more people in anyway, so it's not like anybody's going to turn up late, and if they, anyway, I'll stop blathering. Thank you so much for coming to the Security, Identity, and Privacy mini-conf. It's Erin at the front here in the blue shirt, waving and knitting, and I ran this last year. It was great fun. We come back again, done it again, and I'm very happy to say that the community came out and put in a lot of CFPs. We got more CFPs than we could fit in, which for organizers like us is great because it means we've got lots of good quality content to choose from. Unfortunately for you, it means you don't hear all the good quality content because we only have so many hours in the day. But I think we've come up with a pretty good lineup for the day. I know there are other mini-comps going on, so pick and choose whichever talks you want to go to. But we've got a bit of a story flowing through the day where we'll start off with some of the impacts of security and privacy, flowing on through ways you can look at addressing those, and then finish off the day with a bit of a, I don't know, would you call it a motivational talk? William over the back there is going to be closing our event tonight. Probably more of a demotivational talk from William. So hands up if you know Lana already, or you at least recognize her hair. If you know Lana in any way whatsoever, you'll probably understand that it's not unusual for me to have asked her whether or not I should read her bio, and for her to say, here, read this one instead. So I'm totally prepared. Erin would also like me to point out, which I'm sure you'll notice yourselves because we're all astute in this room, the fantastic way that Lana has managed to color coordinate her hair and her shoes. I think we'll probably need to find a prize for you just for that as the most coordinated speaker of the day. So Lana Brindley has been playing with technology since the summer of the 80s when she got eaten by a grue. She's been writing since she could hold a pencil and is currently writing technical documentation for SUSE, after spending many years hanging around the OpenStack community and generally making a pest of herself. Lana enjoys going to technical conferences to talk about stuff that has been buzzing around in her brain for too long, and also to make sure she leaves the house from time to time. While she isn't generally a technical pessimist, she reads IBM and the Holocaust. She read IBM and the Holocaust recently, and has been looking at technical development with a wary eye ever since. She's fairly certain the future robot overlords will be benign. Mostly. Put your hands together for Lana. Thanks very much.
I do need those. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. So, this little story starts with the American son of German migrants. His name was Herman Hollerith. He was born in 1860. He got a degree in engineering, and he went to work in the US Census Bureau in 1879. There's a stair there. At that time, the census was just a head count. They didn't collect any real data on the population, and they ran it every 10 years. So as it was taking them many, many years to actually collate the data and get it together before the next census ran. And the big problem at the time was it's going to start to take more than 10 years. So the last census wouldn't be finished before it was time to do the next one. Of course, these days we would call that overwhelming technical debt, but they didn't have a name for it. So young Master Hollerith was a bit of a bright spark. He said, there ought to be a machine for doing the purely mechanical work of tabulating. And he set out to build one. By 1884, he had a prototype, and the US Census Bureau used the machines for the 1890 census. So the data, now I'm not going to use my laser pointer, so I'm hoping you can follow my instructions. The data is first encoded on the punch card with the pantograph, which is down here on the right. Then operators load the card into the tabulator up here on the left, so it goes into so you can sort of see a bit of a slot there. Pins drop down onto the card, and where there's a hole, the pin drops through into a little pool of mercury, which completes a circuit. The circuit increments one of the dials on the top there. So each dial on the machine for the census represents one character trait, age, gender, state, that kind of thing. The operator records the data, removes the card, and puts it into the sorter drawer. You can just see it sticking out of the corner there. It's basically just a cabinet. Put it into the sorter drawer, reset the tabulator, ready for the next card. According to the US Census Bureau history site, operators could process 80 cards a minute this way. That's 80 cards a minute. Because Hollerith was a bit of a smarty pants, he didn't sell the machines to the government, he leased them. And after a bit, he managed to lease them to all sorts of government departments all around the world. And that was great because it kept the money rolling in between US censuses. To handle this, he created a company called, creatively, the Hollerith Electric Tabulating System. Over the next few years, Hollerith's company found other companies that were making, quote, machines, things like employee punch clocks, weighing systems, and they merged into a partnership called the Computing Tabulating Recording Company, or CTR. The company became International Business Machines in 1924, and the companies were finally all merged, became the IBM we know and love today in 1933. Anyway, I have a whole other talk that I could give on IBM corporate history, because some things, one other thing is I also have an MBA, which qualifies me to actually talk about that stuff, unlike this. The short version of IBM corporate history talk is that Thomas J. Watson became IBM chairman in a ridiculously dodgy deal in 1914 while he was in jail. And he remained he remained chairman, he didn't remain in jail. He remained chairman until he died in 1956. Because this guy was so dodgy, he didn't like writing things down. And I mention that only because it becomes important later in the story. These are some early IBM machines made by the German IBM subsidiary called De Homag. These machines were called the De Homag Hollerith D11 tabulator and sorter. Got the tabulator on top and the sorter. This is the modernized version of the wooden cabinet we saw down in the corner in the last slide. They were originally used primarily in banks to process account transactions, calculate compounding interest, that kind of thing. And most interesting to the government of the day, the German government of the day, is to cross-reference bank account numbers to census data. I will remind you we're in Germany in 1935. You know when you see pictures of people who've been in the concentration camps and they have a number tattooed on their arm? That number connects the human being to the punch card for one of these machines. So I'd like to give you some facts. In Holland, they had extensive Hollerith infrastructure. It was very well organised and they were quite advanced. By the end of the war, 73% of Dutch Jews had been killed. In France, they didn't have very much Hollerith infrastructure. There was actually a competing company that was, of course, incompatible. So it was disorganised. They didn't have a huge amount. By the end of the war, only 25% of French Jews had been killed. Of course, there are other factors, I will admit that. In short, though, without this technology, the Holocaust would still have happened, don't get me wrong. It would not have been so well organised. It would not have been so well planned. It would not have been so well executed. Of course, I'm sure you all know about the Nuremberg Trials that happened after the war. We remember those for the Nazis that were tried and found guilty for war crimes in the main trial. There were 12 more trials between 1946 and 1949. I don't know about you, but I didn't learn that in school. Those trials covered 177 people: physicians, judges, military personnel, civil servants, and industrialists. People like Gustav Krupp. The Krupp company provided Panzer tanks to the Nazis. Interestingly, it didn't slow that company down very much. You probably know them as ThyssenKrupp now, and they make elevators. So you would expect, knowing this, that senior IBM officials would have ended up before the Nuremberg trials, just like Mr. Krupp. Joke's on you. The Nuremberg trials were pretty unique. They had to be conducted in 4 languages, more or less simultaneously, and this had never been done before. Would anyone like to take a guess at who provided the computing power to make that happen? Anyone? Amazon. No, try again. IBM, very well done, thank you. Okay, so for completely unrelated reasons, I actually happened to be in Nuremberg around about the time I was writing this talk. I took the opportunity to go to the documentation centre and the Nazi Party rally grounds. It took me about 3 hours to go through the museum. It's extremely moving. I highly recommend it to anyone if you happen to be in Nuremberg or close by. Fascinating, really good tour, really enjoyed it. IBM was not mentioned once. I was looking. So now I'd like to have a short mental health break, and Ben may like to do some honours for me. So take a deep breath, everybody. Breathe in, breathe out. Let all the Nazis go. We're gonna move on from the Nazis a little bit. Would anyone like some candy? Yes? Excellent. Got some over here. Down the back. Nice work. Everyone breathing again.
I have actually promised Lana that I've successfully hit somebody on the head before doing this.
Please repeat it. No! We have a winner. Yay, excellent. Awesome, let's move on. Fewer Nazis, I promise. Okay, hopefully what you've picked up so far is that Hollerith was a brilliant young man who solved a very difficult problem. It is not Hollerith's fault that his technology was used to murder people in World War II. It's also not his fault that no one was held responsible. It's also not his fault that we seem to have collectively forgotten about it. The point I would like to make is that throughout history, technology has been used in some pretty horrible ways. So now I would like to take a look at some more historical oh no moments. Alfred Nobel, I'm sure you recognise his name. He was the guy who invented dynamite. He also owned a large weapons manufacturing plant. So Alfred's brother died in Caen in France, and a French newspaper got confused and wrote an obituary for Alfred. It was nasty, and I love it so much. It was titled, "The Merchant of Death is Dead." And it had this wonderful line in it. Dr. Alfred Nobel became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before. So Alfred read this obituary for himself, had what is technically known as an oh no moment, and completely secretly went on to establish the Nobel Prize with his personal fortune. Hilariously, he decided not to tell anyone about it, so we all got a wonderful surprise when he died for real and we opened his will. Otto Hahn got the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1944 for working out nuclear fission. The prize should actually have been given to him along with his two colleagues at the top here. That's Lisa Meitner and Fritz Strassmann. Unfortunately, the other two had to leave Germany in a bit of a hurry a couple of years earlier. Later on, of course, that technology was used to bomb Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the entire world had an oh no moment. And now we have ethics committees in chemistry. Eugenics was the practice of sterilising portions of the population in order to stop them breeding. Hitler was obviously a big fan, but I promised fewer Nazis. So let's talk about when it was a bit of a big deal in the US. 33 US states had sterilisation programs in place. It was against mentally ill people, disabled people, alcoholics, people living in poverty, and people deemed to be promiscuous, who, as far as I can tell by reading the history, was mostly black women. Some reports say that around 65,000 Americans were legally sterilised during the first half of the 20th century. That turned out to be a bit of an oh no moment for biology. Later on, of course, the World Health Organization, it was created in 1948, and it was the first specialised agency of the UN, which I think speaks to how important the world thought it was. Its mission is really multifaceted, and I went through its mission document to try and find a nice single sentence line that sort of summed it up. To address the underlying social and economic determinants of health through policies and programs that enhance health equity and integrate pro-poor, gender-responsive and human rights-based approaches. If I can summarise that for you, it's Don't let your government kill you and tell you it's good for your health. In a similar vein, there have been some great drug failures. Thalidomide's probably the one most people know of. It did make the idea of having some better oversight on medicine seem like a good idea. Thalidomide was sold over the counter from 1957 all around the world. It was recommended to pregnant women to alleviate the symptoms of morning sickness. Unfortunately, it also created horrific birth defects. About 40% of children died when they were born after their mothers having thalidomide. Those who did survive were missing the long limbs, many of them. Oh no, right? Court cases were brought against the manufacturer all over the world, including a class action in Australia that actually only was finalised in 2012. The US Food and Drug Administration already existed at the time of thalidomide, but the thalidomide cases strengthened its ability significantly, and there was actually a whole bunch of other laws, including here in Australia, that were strengthened as a result of the thalidomide cases. We didn't let too many bridges collapse before we decided that civil engineering could use some regulation. That's the National Society of Professional Engineers, which was established in 1932, in America anyway. And it only took one plane flying into a building to establish that maybe we shouldn't let people take box cutters on planes. I'm hoping you can see where I'm going here. People very rarely come up with new ideas, new inventions, new technology with the intention of killing or hurting people. It's the unintended consequences that cause the problems. It is also, however, those unintended consequences, those oh no moments, that mean we end up with better regulation, better laws, and our society actually improves as a result of that. So, ethics committees and government oversight is not going to stop bad things happening. I am a bit of a realist. They do help prevent them, though, and what they do is give us some kind of recourse when the worst happens. Would anyone like some candy? Take a breath, breathing in, breathing out. Oh, relax. Go.
Heads up.
Hey. Oh. Yes. I think I'm glad I'm up here.
Is there anybody who wants chocolate for that? Is there anybody who wants to aim for my head?
Excellent. Okay. Ready to move on? I want you to consider these two cases. Ben's still going. Volkswagen was caught out having written software code that allowed their cars to cheat emissions tests. I'm sure you remember. Uber also developed software, it was called greyball, allowed them to cheat law enforcement officials trying to crack down on ride sharing. The difference between these two cases is that Volkswagen software engineers went to jail and Uber software engineers didn't. Why? Because one's a car company and one's a software company. We all know Facebook and other startups tend to like to use the phrase move fast and break stuff. In IT, we talk about innovation a lot. We talk about thinking outside the box. I'm sure we've all had a project manager who has urged us to think different or challenge paradigms. It's all great. And I am not suggesting that we should stop trying to solve difficult problems. I don't think we should stop building new things. Don't think we should stop thinking up interesting ways to solve old problems. But what happens when we, like Alfred Nobel before us, step back from what we've created and go, oh no. In my opinion, IT should have had its oh no moment back when IBM provided the computing power that made the Holocaust possible. But not only did it go unpunished, we've collectively forgotten about it in the 80 years since. So there's never actually been a public reckoning for that. So The first part of this talk, we were looking at some examples of oh no moments that led to real change. The next part of this talk, I'd like to look at some IT innovations that haven't led to real change. This machine here was a medical device used in the 1980s. It was, they treated cancer with radiation. We still do this very much, but not with this machine. It was called the Therac 25. It was the third version of this particular device. The previous two devices had hardware interlocks in them. So if the machine did something that could potentially be dangerous, it would blow a physical fuse. That meant a human being had to go to the cupboard, get a new fuse out, install the fuse, go back to the machine, reset it, and start again. This version went to software control. It was written entirely in assembly by one guy who, it seems, didn't quite know what he was doing, and later on couldn't be tracked down. We've all been there. It turned out that the software he wrote had a race condition. When you selected a mode, it took 8 seconds for the machine to move into that mode. If you tried to select anything else during that 8 seconds, the machine would ignore it. It would not move into the new position. So you would end up with the machine physically set up for one operation and the beam set up for a different one. This literally cooked people. One guy being treated for brain cancer reported a bright light and the sound of frying eggs, and he died 3 weeks later. Oh no, right? Incidentally, they settled out of court. Cars are increasingly being driven by software rather than physical mechanisms, and this is often referred to as drive-by-wire or fly-by-wire. I'm sure you've heard of it. Of course, replacing physical connection with software can sometimes have interesting consequences. And one of these is neatly demonstrated by Toyota in the early noughties in the US. A couple of drivers had reported sudden unintended acceleration, which is the technical term, in a 2007 model Lexus ES350, which is one of those. Toyota investigated. They determined that the floor mats were to blame. The accelerator was somehow getting caught in the mat. Everyone brought their cars back, had their floor mats replaced. Under warranty. Aren't they nice? Toyota promised to make a couple of other modifications to prevent this from happening, but they wanted to wait for the next major redesign. So they kept going with this model for a couple of years. Interestingly, at this time in their corporate communications, they ceased writing anything down. It's funny how that always happens, isn't it? Anyway, so this design was used in the car for another couple of years until a guy driving a 2009 model Lexus ES350 with his family in the car drove off the highway into an embankment and killed everyone on board. This got a whole lot of news coverage in the US at the time because a family member in the backseat had managed to make a 911 call, which got onto the news. Now, that's a YouTube video. It's actually a still of the YouTube video. I was intending originally to play it. It's about 25 seconds long, and I listened to it and I felt ill, so I decided not to. This talk is traumatic enough as it is. It's on YouTube if you really want to, but up to you. So in the emergency call, the man states that the accelerator is stuck and that the brakes won't work, which is probably your first clue. So Toyota recalled more vehicles and, you guessed it, replaced the floor mats. Problems continued. In 2013, a court ruled that the problems were caused by problems with the drive-by-wire system. Basically, the runtime stack of the operating system was not large enough, so the stack would grow too big, overflow, overwrite data, and that caused the acceleration. In the end, though, no single cause was ever identified. If you talk to people about it now, you do the amount of research I have done on this, you will find most people still blame the floor mats. You might recall IBM's Watson. That's IBM's Watson, the machine learning program, not the wartime chairman, for the record. We've moved forward in time. IBM's Watson beat a couple of smart humans on Jeopardy back in 2011. We also had Google's ML program AlphaGo that managed to beat the Go champion in 2015. Then in 2018, an AI system that Amazon was using to select resumes turned out to be sexist, to the surprise of absolutely no women working in IT. From all that, we're now in a place where super convincing deepfake videos are more or less commonplace. BuzzFeed created this deepfake video of President Obama that went a little bit viral a few years ago. And of course, deepfake porn has been around for many years. And I don't want to understate the damage that that has caused to individuals. But I do wonder what happens when a deepfake video of President Trump declaring war goes viral. I do think we've got some danger ahead on that road. For completely unrelated reasons, I looked into the killer robots thing a few years ago. I can relate that story if anyone wants to know later on. This is super tricky because the technology being used for automated weapons systems are also used for things like self-driving cars, airplanes, medicine, surgery, and even peacekeeping operations. Because after all, if you can drop a bomb, you can drop an aid package. In this case, this was in South Korea. South Korean university went into partnership with an arms manufacturer to develop autonomous weapons. And what ended up stopping them was a bunch of universities getting together to sign an open letter. Incidentally, that open letter was started by an Australian academic, which I think is something we should be proud of. But the open letter threatened to boycott the South Korean university involved. South Korean government didn't intend to step in. The UN didn't intend to step in. And as it is, we don't actually know that the research has been stopped. The chancellor of the South Korean university wrote a lovely letter that said it had been. I'm sure he was being honest. But the weapons organisation that was funding it, I don't know, but they could be quite happily moving along. I wouldn't be at all surprised if they've waved chunks of cash at various academics, to be honest. It is all speculation, of course. I have no idea, but that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. There's no oversight, there's no regulation, there's no repercussions, and there's a massive amount of money. This one, since the first time I gave this talk, has been picking up pace in the mainstream media, and I'm sure you've heard about it. So I'm not going to repeat all the finer details, but I'd like to take a look at the software angle, which the mainstream media seem to be missing. So, just to catch you up to date, Xinjiang is a province in northwest China. It is primarily occupied by the Uyghur people, who are the largest Muslim group in China. In Hotan, which is the capital of Xinjiang, there is a police station every 300 meters or so. They're kind of cute. They look like this. They've got lounges in the bottom and a place you can charge your phone. You can just sort of chill out in the bottom of the police station. If that doesn't sound like a police state to you, I'd like you to wait for the next bit. Every citizen has an identity card, and you move through checkpoints around the city. At a checkpoint, police will scan your card, they will take a photograph, they will take your fingerprints, and they will perform an iris scan. You also need to unlock your phone and pop it into a cradle where your data is downloaded for later use. That's not just for the people they're suspicious of, it's for everyone. There are 4 or 5 checkpoints every kilometre, and as citizens move through, they move through them many times a day, just going by their daily business. The roads are lined with poles with cameras which are watching pedestrians, but they're also performing pattern matching between drivers and licence plates. So if you're Uyghur and you have done even a relatively minor infraction, such as, say, calling your relatives who live outside China, you will get sent to one of hundreds of thousands of re-education camps, which until very recently did not officially exist. No one really knows how many people are in the re-education camps. ABC about 6 months ago was saying 2 million. It could be many more, we don't know. Of course, locking up minority groups for no reason is nothing new. By no means a new thing. But I think the way technology is being put to use in this case definitely is. So I bet the people who invented facial recognition have had several oh no moments over many years, at least in part to China. In that same vein, you might have also heard of Palantir. They're the company that use what they call, quote, minority report style predictions about crime. Originally developed for the Pentagon, they used it to identify terrorists in Iraq, but the technology has now been imported to downtown Los Angeles, where it is being used to lock up brown people before they do anything wrong. Incidentally, if you Google for Palantir, you don't get any images. So you have a minority report still, you're welcome. Point is, it's not just China. Finally, I'm sure you remember the 2 Boeing crashes that happened last year. The 737 MAX story is interesting because it's not just a software failure, it's also a documentation failure. I am fully aware that I'm going to oversimplify this, so I'm going to apologise to all the aircraft nerds in the audience. I'm sure you exist. But basically what happened here is they bolted some big engines onto a small plane. That's my interpretation. That wasn't what caused the problem, though. What caused the problem was in the software that managed how the aircraft handled the big-ass engines. The chaser to that shot is that the documentation wasn't clear on what to do when this software kicked in. So the consequences of this, while they were not particularly swift, they were decisive. So you've got to give Boeing that. A 737 MAX hasn't flown since these 2 accidents. My primary concern on this is twofold. First, will they just bolt more software patches on to fix the problems? Or second, what changes are being made to ensure that the software they write is less problematic in the future? And we have our final mental health break. So we'll give out the last of the chockies.
I'm actually wondering if throwing chocolates at people is creating more anxiety.
Maybe. Do you feel anxious about the chocolates, people? Do I need to remove the chocolates from this talk if I give it in the future? One up the back here. I think there's still some left. I don't want to take these home, seriously. No, I don't want one. Oh, I nearly got you, Steve. Good. Let's move on. Last one. We're in the last stretch, guys. We've nearly made it. So while the increasing mainstream media awareness of personal data and the nefarious purposes that we can put it to has been very heartening recently, I'm not sure that Cambridge Analytica and reviews into Uber are enough to be considered an oh no moment that will actually change anything. I was heartened a couple of months ago to see a couple of responsible technology organisations pop up in Australia. I highly recommend you go and check them out and support them. So I do think it might be starting. Everyone involved in technology development has a part to play before a product goes on sale. Project and program managers set the scope, define the project. Software developers write the code. Quality assurance tests software and hardware. Documentation writers explain it. Sales goes out there and sells it. All of us in our day-to-day jobs are in the position of poking at products that we don't fully understand in order to work out how to make them work, how to improve them, and how to discuss them with our clients. I say we should expand that thinking just a tiny bit. How could I use this product to do harm? How could I use it to discover things about people that I really should not be discovering? Can I use this social product to stalk my ex? What about someone who said something nasty about me online? What can they find out about me using this product? Can I use this platform, this API, this plugin, this app, this feature to do something that as reasonable, moral human beings, we feel just a tiny bit bad about? It's also important to think about using it in conjunction with other technologies. Recognizing someone's face is one thing. When you combine that with GPS locations, government databases, and purchase history, you have a completely different problem. you also have the answer to why I don't use supermarket loyalty cards anymore. A point I would also like to make here is that it's not just about ethics. It's not just about individual humans doing the right thing. It's about legislation, and it's about punishment for companies that do the wrong thing. It's about enforceable accountability. If I can give you one piece of advice, don't read your marketing department's hype. If you do read your marketing department's hype, don't believe it. Nuclear fission has saved millions of lives. It's used in cancer treatment. It's provided light and power to billions. It's made surgery and even vegetables safer through irradiation. That's what the marketing department want you to hear. It also made nuclear war a real possible threat. And the marketing department is unlikely to mention that. So, question things, raise bugs, talk about it with your development team and your manager. Until software engineering has a real, honest-to-God, oh no moment, and an ethics board with actual legal teeth is born, you, individually, each one of you, is at the forefront of technology that hurts and technology that doesn't. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lana. We do have about 9-ish minutes for questions, if anybody has any. Please do wait for the microphone, though, so we can capture the questions for the camera. Thanks.
Thanks. My question's about, I guess, moral provenance, where there's such a thing as fair trade coffee. Should we be considering technology choices that don't have the profits of people that have benefited from the suffering of others in their provenance as well? Like, should we just boycott IBM full stop and build our own? Or, what do you think about that idea?
I love the idea of labelling. I think labelling would be a great way to... as someone with a child who has food issues, labelling is great, right? Labelling is awesome. If we could work out a way to do that for software and hardware, that would make my day, honestly. As far as boycotting, I don't know. I find boycotts, especially with technology, incredibly hard to even realistically understand how that works. I tried to de-Google many, many years ago and completely failed, clearly, as you can see. So it's difficult. It's difficult to boycott large companies, especially large companies like Google, Facebook, Uber. Mind you, I haven't used Uber yet. I've managed to avoid that one so far. But yeah, just boycotting IBM is probably not realistically a thing any of us could do, as much as I would like to say yes. Yeah.
G'day, this is a question I've been thinking about recently that relates a little bit to your talk, and I'd just like your answer to it. Given that a lot of this stuff, obviously we're talking about ethics, and you're definitely talking about history and learning from history, which of the letters in STEM involves a subject that would cover any of those ideas?
I don't know, can we make the E ethics? Look, I mean, without wanting to toot my own horn too much, I've spent a lot of time at university. I've got several degrees. And every single thing I have studied has had an ethics component. And while I don't have an IT degree, I have an information systems degree, I'm absolutely certain that an IT degree would have had an ethics component to it as well.
They don't. Yes, they do. That's a dangerous assumption.
Okay, it might depend on which university you're at. The point I'm making is most degrees of some description will have an ethics component. And I think that is the way we need to think about ethics. It touches every single thing we do, touches every single interaction we have with another human being. So our lives intersect in interesting and sometimes unexpected ways.
Yeah, I kind of just meant that there's a real focus towards an area, a particular branch of education, which really conspicuously leaves out some areas that we could really deal with right now.
I agree, but what I'm saying is... Yeah, true, but I don't think we can treat ethics as its own subject separate to everything else. Ethics is a component of absolutely everything we do, and we need to treat ethics as a component of everything we do. We can't just go out and study ethics. Sorry? I'm trying to work out where the question is. Yes, excellent.
Yep, I got a question. Have you looked at the ACM and IEEE Code of Ethics? They updated it last 2018, and I think that, to me, it's a it's a gold standard for how ethics should be.
Yep.
They are modeling it not entirely after the medical fraternity, but I think that's got good basis for you to consider. I mean, if you have
Absolutely,
have you looked at
yeah, I absolutely agree. And the more people are on board with that, the more. What I'm saying is about enforceable accountability, though. We can't force anyone to abide by a standard, and we can't punish anyone if they fail to live up to that standard. So that's sort of the point I'm trying to make.
As developers, one of the things that we can influence is licensing, but in the free software world, many of the licenses we use intentionally don't restrict how people can use the software that is made under those licenses. Should we be questioning that, and should we be looking to change it?
Yeah, look, that's probably a topic for Karen Sandler or one of the Software Conservancy people to talk about. Yeah, licensing needs work. I'm not a lawyer.
Lana, thank you. It's obviously an emotional talk for you.
Yes, it is. It cuts to the bone a little bit.
And one of your points is that we, as members of the community, can take this forward and participate ethically to drive change. But how do we impact the unwashed around us, the wider community, the rest of the world? Because not everyone has our perspective. You know, what are your views on how we move this forward outside of this room?
I don't know. Education. I really don't know. I wish I had answers to it too. No, I don't. I really don't know. I guess that's why I give the talk. I'm not a security person. I'm not an ethics person. This isn't my day job. I'm a technical writer. But it mattered so much to me when I started understanding it. Like I said in the bio, it's buzzing around in my brain and I had to get it out somehow, and this seemed like a good forum. So, yeah, I don't have any answers. I wish everyone had just shut off Facebook and Uber and all the rest, and we could just get on with our lives, to be honest. But, I mean, I still get dirty looks when people say, oh, you know, I couldn't find you on Facebook. Yeah, that's because I don't use it. Mind you, I do use Twitter. Everyone knows me on Twitter, and I probably shouldn't be using that either if I'm going to live up to my own ethics. So it's so problematic on so many levels, and as an individual, it's really freaking difficult. So I wish I had answers. I'm sorry.
Hey, Lana.
Oh, hey.
Hey. I was very fortunate to hear one of the first versions of this talk many years ago. And in that time...
I promise this is actually the last version. I've absolutely sworn off doing this talk anymore.
It's a great talk. But in that time, since you first presented it, that was before Cambridge Analytica, before the Boeing stuff, before the Uyghur stuff started coming out. What do you think it has to take before we do have that software or technology oh no moment?
I don't know. I wish I knew, and I guess that's probably why I needed to write the talk, is to try and work out if there was a thread. And there is a thread that you can follow through history. It's just I don't know what the next logical step is. Like I said, the first time when the Uyghur entered the talk, it wasn't in the mainstream media at all. I found a single Economist article on it, and I actually carried that magazine around with me to prove that it was a real thing. It has reached the mainstream media. It's been all over the ABC for several months now, so definitely go and read more about it. There are links in that. If you go to that document, there are links there to more. And I'm excited that they're reporting it. I'm excited that you can say the plight of the Uyghur in Australia now and people know what you're talking about, right? That's good. We're not talking about the technology aspect of it at all. We're talking about it as concentration camps, which obviously are terrible, and I'm not saying they're not, and we should be reporting on it. But we're not looking at how technology is being used in this, and I think China has a lot to answer for in terms of the way they use technology. The way that Alibaba and Tencent and all those are implicated in the way they use their technology, the way they spy on their citizens. And while, no, they're not a democratic country, and I guess they can run their country any way they like, I think it's a lesson for us who do live in democratic countries to be very wary about what's going on and the way that technology is being implemented. I wish I knew what the oh no moment was going to be, because according to me, it should have been IBM. back in the 1940s, and it hasn't happened, so I'm still waiting.
Right, well, we're going to draw it to a close. We've come to the half past.
Sorry, I'm sorry, but there is actually a woman who would like to ask a question.
Where was the hand?
Can we please have the? Can we
Sure.
please let?
Very quickly. I'm sure Brett understands.
I've had a lot of questions from blokes. Thank you.
Thanks, Lana. The very good presentation. The ethics, I think, is catching up in the academic world and the oversight as well. The problem now is the research and development in big enterprises, and there's no oversight. They're black box. What do you think of that?
Yeah, again, I know that there are some voluntary ethics committees and things coming in at some of the bigger software companies. I think Google has one. Facebook's talked about it, not sure what's going on there. But they're voluntary and they're internal, and it's like the company looking after itself, and I imagine there's going to be a fair bit of, oh, she'll be right, mate, except probably the American version of that. But yeah, I don't know. I do think we actually need an ethics board which can work maybe as a UN subcommittee or something that can work internationally across borders and can actually punish people when stuff goes wrong. Because if we can start locking up Uber people who kill people, then that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.